Well, some of you I have heard from me by means of email because I just wanted to be sure that you were aware of how great an opportunity this is today. I met Erin, I think it was in the summer of the campaign. I was interviewing political candidates with a group, and this woman walked in the room, and of course, as you can see, she makes an impact just by walking in the room. And this was a room that had an especially low ceiling. But the fact is that when she sat down and we started talking with her about issues around education and the community, I just had a strong sense that this is somebody who is making a difference in our communities. And you can't stop her, whether she gets elected for political office or not. Erin finds a way. So since the election and her razor-thin loss, 1%, she has made wonderful lemonade out of that lemon, and has been talking, I'll let her talk about the details, but has been putting herself out in the community to make a difference in terms of how we understand what we need for racial healing and what we need for effective education and how those come together. And so I was on a Zoom with you this weekend, or this spring, and I thought, you're somebody I want to share with my neighbors at Hearthstone. So I checked in with Kristen, and the rest is history. Here she is, and I want you to welcome Erin Jones.
Okay, let me make sure. Can you all hear me? Okay. I don't like to be at podiums because I'm already 6 feet tall. And I like to be where I can see your faces. That's important to me. So I am honored to be here. And Rita is someone, my team, so I have a little mini team from my business. I speak all over the United States and Canada. So I'm international now. But I get to share my story all over the country. And my little team came to me after the political campaign that I ran. And so they have no idea about the campaign. And they said, "You're going where?" I said, "I'm going to a retirement community." What? And I said, "My friend Rita is someone that if she asked me to come somewhere, I'm going." And they said, "You're going to drive an hour and a half. I live in the state capital." I said, "Yes, I am driving an hour and a half for Rita. So, yes, I am here for her. But also for you." My parents joined their independent living facility exactly 4 months ago. And so for me, this is not just about Rita. This is really personal for me because as I look out at you, you look a lot like my parents. My mom is 82. My dad is 81, about to be 82. And just I'm going to start a little bit with their story because I hope that will connect you to me in a new way. On June 10th last year, my dad fell and broke his hip. I should go back to 2020. In 2020, my mother started seeing signs that he probably had Parkinson's, but she wasn't really sure. And it was after the pandemic had started, and so they couldn't get any testing done. And so he didn't get tested until 2021. And by that point, things had already started to affect him. And the last year and a half or so has been a steady decline of his ability to walk. And he fell. And in fact, on June 10th, that morning, we had lunch together. We had a great lunch. And he was using his walker. And it was great. And they were supposed to go and get his nails clipped. And he goes to a podiatrist and gets them clipped professionally. And so I knew they were going to be somewhere for an hour, and then I was going to swing by their house to to give them something. And my mom calls me. And I can tell from the shake in her voice something is very serious. And she said, Erin, I've already called the emergency vehicles. And I'm like, what? I just saw you. She said, your dad has fallen. And I literally jump into my car and drive. At the time, their house that they no longer live in was about a 15-minute drive from my house. And when I got there, this is the really cool thing about my life. I have trained all of our firefighters on racial equity. So I know all of them. I know all of them. All of the fire chiefs have had sons in my husband's football program. So I know all of them. And I get to the house, and one of the fire chiefs is there carrying my dad to the gurney. And he said, oh, this is your dad, Erin? And I said, it's my dad. Take him carefully. And my dad was in so much pain. I have never seen my father yell before, ever. He's never yelled in my whole life. He was a middle school and high school math teacher, the calmest human ever. 6'4", really big guy, but very gentle demeanor. And my dad just screamed. There's nothing like watching your father scream in pain. And he actually said his first curse word ever. And I was like, oh, my ears are bleeding. I am 54 and I just heard my dad curse. This is not a thing. And I knew, though, that pain had to be so significant. I would end up spending from June 10th to November 1st in the hospital and then in rehab every single day. I gave up my consulting business. I did not travel. I did not visit a school. And you'll understand, I mean, I think a lot of children may do that for their parents, but when you understand who my parents are, you'll understand why, for me, it was a no-brainer to show up every day. And what I learned in the process was, because I showed up every day looking like this, my dad got what he needed. Because I have also run school buildings and school districts, and I know how to ask for what I need. In a very kind way. Like, that's just how I show up always. But I know how to be direct, and I know how to say, he hasn't had his catheter changed. Somebody needs to do that. I can sense a UTI is coming. I learned what to look for, and I stayed with them until November 1st. At the end of October, my mother realized going back to our home is probably not the best idea. And she and I got online and looked at all of the independent living facilities in the area. Because my dad was going to be released. He was able to walk kind of again. And there was one facility with 1 2-bedroom available in our entire county. I live in Thurston County. One. It was 1 mile from my house. And we went to visit it that night. And my mom, as I'm driving her there, she said, Erin, I have one stipulation. It has to have a walk-in closet. I was like, please, God, let it have a walk-in closet. Please, God, let it have. And do you know the first room in the apartment is a walk-in closet? And I remember my mom just crying. She said, this is where we're going to be. She said, I have to go back and ask your dad. And we drive back to the rehab facility where my dad still is. And my dad was always the decision maker in their marriage. But when he saw her face, he said, let's put the $500 down and just take it. And so glad they did. I would move them out of their house and help them sell their house 2 weeks later. My dad fell 3 weeks in again. And I knew the day that he fell that he had broken something. And he had a full hip replacement the first time. So on June 11th, he had a full hip replacement. I don't know health, but I know physics. And I knew from looking at my dad that he'd broken his femur. I could tell. He had a brand new hip, but an 81-year-old leg. Right? I knew that torque had broken something. Do you know it took 3 days in the hospital before they could find out what was wrong? 3 days of my dad being in horrible pain. And finally they found it. And I called the rehab facility where my dad had been before, and I said, can my dad come back here? I know for him with his Parkinson's, the most consistency we can get him, the better. And they said, of course, we would have him back. Same room. They gave him the same exact room, just knowing with his Parkinson's, he needed a place that he knew. And so he ended up in the same bed. And he was released from there at the end of January. And they are back in their independent living facility. I have lunch or dinner with them every day. I had breakfast with them today so I could come up here. But I visit them every single day. And why does that matter? Because I don't look like my parents. My parents look like most of you in this room. I was adopted in August of 1971 by 2 Scandinavian Americans from northern Minnesota. Some of y'all can relate to that. Okay. My mom she says she's 5'3". She's not 5'3". She's about 5'1". Her mom was 4'11". My dad is 6'4", although now with the Parkinson's in his back, he's shorter than me, which is wild. But as a way to engage you in a conversation about race and reconciliation and why this is so important to me, I'm going to share my personal story with you about how I came here today. Because I believe in the story is how we build bridges to one another. I believe we're much more alike than we are different. And I experience America very differently than most of you do. I do. And so I want to share those stories with you. I will open for questions at the end. So if you have questions, if you can hold on to them. But I want to share the story of how I came to be here today. And I hope it will inspire you. I hope it will challenge you. I hope it will cause you to be curious. I believe in being radically curious, which is why I'm in places like this. I have stuff to learn from you all too. I've learned a lot from this one right here. I'm a learner too. I don't ever go to places where I don't also learn something. So I invite you to be curious today. But I was born, my mother let me believe what I wanted to about my biological parents. We never talked about my biological parents, ever, as a child. And it's not that they were necessarily trying to hide things from me, but when I was adopted, it was a sealed adoption. So the names of my parents were sealed. I had one piece of paper about my parents. On that paper, it said, name of father, Negro. Name of father, Negro. That's his name on my birth certificate. So I tell people all the time, I am about to be 55. I'll be 55 in exactly a month from today. And that's on my birth certificate. So, but I have one piece of paper about them. Dad, Negro, mom, Norwegian lady. That's what it says on my birth certificate. That's what I knew about my parents. And so in my mind, I have always told the story that I was left at the hospital because back in 1971, being in an interracial relationship was unacceptable. So many Americans don't know, but until 1969, it was illegal. It was against the law. And even though it became legal in 1969, it was still unacceptable in most places in the United States. So I always told the story. I was abandoned in a hospital because my father was Negro and my mother was white. But my mother decided last year, my adopted mom, who I don't call her adopted mom, she's just mom. I love my mom. I go to bat for anyone that messes with my mom, okay? I love her. She and I could not look more different. I love my mom. But my mom decided to text me last year. No, actually 2 years ago. I was 52 when she texted me. I was actually headed to do a big keynote in Town Hall, Seattle Town Hall. So kind of a big deal. I'm getting ready to do a big town hall meeting. My mom knows this because she follows my calendar. That's how she lives. She lives through my calendar. So she will say, Erin, have a really great trip to Seattle today. Get to the airport early, honey. You know how she follows my calendar. That's how she lives through my calendar. And she decides to text me as I'm driving to Seattle to do this big keynote speech. And I was by myself that day. And I don't know if you have had cars that talk to you, but now you can connect your phone to your car so it talks at you. When you get a text message, you don't have to actually look at it. It will talk to you. And my phone starts talking to me. Message from mom. Okay. Erin, I heard you on NPR last night. Oh, didn't realize I was on NPR. So I'm having this conversation with my phone that is my car talking at me. And then she says, "Are you retelling your origin story?" Huh? And she says, "You know, your mother had an affair with a black man." So I am learning in text message about my origins. Don't do that. If you have children or grandchildren, don't do that. Not in text message. Have coffee or something while you're telling them. But I learned in a text message that my biological mother was married to a white man and had an affair with a black man. And of course, in 1970, if you found out you were pregnant, you could not have an abortion in Minnesota. So she knew when she found out she was pregnant, I'm going to birth a brown baby. I probably should tell my husband. And she did, and he gave her an ultimatum, either me or the baby. And she chose him. I learned all of this in a text message. While I pulled over. At that point, I was a hot mess. I was in DuPont. I pulled over in DuPont and sat on the side of the road for about half an hour crying. And some people may say, well, Erin, why does it matter? Like, that's so long ago. It matters. It matters. And so I sat on the side of the road and I cried for half an hour. And then I called my mom and said, don't ever do that again, please. That was so hurtful. And she said, I thought I'd told you. I said, no, Mom, I would remember this. This is something I would remember. And, but that is my origin story. I was left in a hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. At 3 months old, Bruce and Dorothy Adamson, two teachers from northern Minnesota, small town, Iron Range, Minnesota, showed up at the Children's Home Society and they asked the director, who are the babies no one wants? And the director said, black babies. Nobody wants black babies. Imagine saying that out loud. No one wants black babies. And my very courageous Scandinavian, tall but so nerdy and quiet dad said, I guess that's what we want then. And my dad tells the story of walking through the nursery and looking at all the cribs and getting to my crib and saying, that's the one we want. I was not rejected. I was chosen by Bruce and Dorothy Adamson. I was chosen by them. I think how we tell our story matters. And I understand that adoption is not great for every kid, but y'all, my parents are the two best humans on the planet. Do you know they were disowned by their parents the next day? Disowned. Like, why couldn't you just have adopted one of ours? Why did you have to go adopt one of them? But my dad is the most courageous human I know. And my dad decided they are going to love her. And he waited until Christmas. And he decided, I'm going to bring Erin to meet the family on Christmas Day, and they're going to love her. And he combed my afro out with the white people comb, because that's what he had. In Stillwater, Minnesota, that's what he had. And I had this much hair on a 6-month-old body. I want you to imagine that. And my dad tells the story of bringing me into his parents' home. And all the cousins were there, and his brother, he had one brother, and the cousins. And my grandfather took one look at me and said, she's so cute, how could we not love her? Of course. What were they expecting? And so he gave the blessing to the family to love me as one of them. Now here's the really beautiful thing about our family. I am the only girl cousin on either side of the family. It gets better. We are all 6 feet taller. We all played college basketball. We all became teachers. We all have written at least one book. And we all sing and play instruments. They all look Scandinavian. But we are so much more alike than we are different. And my cousins and I are like brother and sister. Really beautiful thing on that side of the family. My mom's side of the family was not so nice, though. And I may not get to the end of the story about my mom's side of the family, so I'll just tell you now. My grandmother, my mom's mother, called me the N-word with the hard R until I was 30 years old. Until I was 30 years old. So I will try to get to that story. But if I don't, I just need you to understand it was not smooth sailing for us. So people ask often, so when did you know you were a different color from your parents? The first time I was aware, I was 4 years old. We lived in the small town of Stillwater, Minnesota. My dad was a teacher at the middle school there. And 3 doors down from me was a little girl named Melanie Dunn, and she was having a birthday party. She was turning 5. I was about to be 5, and it was my very first party that I can remember. And Melanie, for some reason that day, decided to put her arm next to mine, and she said, "Erin, how come you're always dirty? Why does your mother give you a bath?" Now, what I need you to understand is I was the only brown person in our whole town. So I want you to imagine you're a 5-year-old child, and my skin is brown, and everyone else's skin is white. So I want you to think about this. I talk to kids too. Is that racist or is that ignorance? It's ignorance, right? You only know what you know. And if you've never seen another brown person, and Erin is the only brown person, and we associate brown with dirt, here's the worst part of that story. It's not her, what she said. I ran to her bathroom because I suddenly thought maybe my skin is dirty because my mom's been using the wrong soap. And I want you to imagine being a 4-year-old kid trying to wash the brown off your skin. And of course, the brown did not leave my skin. And I left her house crying, and I ran home. And my dad was standing at the door, and he said, "Honey, what happened?" I said, "Daddy, we need to get better soap." And that's all I said. And I know that my dad walked down to Melanie's house to figure out what's going on here. Just 3 weeks later, my dad would come home from teaching, and he would bring us all into the living room, and he announced to everyone, "We're moving to the Netherlands." So remember, I have just turned 5 now. 3 weeks later, I've just turned 5. What does the Netherlands sound like? Who's ever seen Peter Pan? I am ready to go live with Captain Hook and Tinkerbell. When my dad said Netherlands, I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a real place. Okay, we're going to go live with Peter Pan. And my dad said, no, honey. The Netherlands is a country across an ocean. I am 5. I have not started school yet. I don't know what a country is. I don't know what an ocean is. We live in Minnesota. There's no ocean near Minnesota. I don't know what he's talking about. So my dad does the thing that teachers do when they want to teach you about a thing in 1976. They go to the public library and they get a movie, like a real movie. You all remember the real films, right? You had to have a projector to put that. My dad went and got that kind of movie. Like before DVDs, and these kids don't understand. That's how old I am, is he had to get a projector, rent a projector. And this real film, the one movie in all of Minnesota public libraries about the Netherlands. Now, what should he have done first before he showed it to us? Watched it. He should have watched it first. My dad did not watch it because, of course, you had to feed it through the machine, and he wasn't doing that twice. And he thought it's from the public library. How bad could it be? Oh, no. Yes. And it may be worse than you're imagining, but it's different than you're imagining. Can I paint a picture for you? Okay, I love painting a picture because it really will leave an image in your mind. So Netherlands means low country, low land. Nether regions, low. The Atlantic Ocean or the North Sea is here, and the land is here. Land, ocean. There is a wall that goes around the entire country called a dike, and it's supposed to hold the ocean from the land, except this movie was about the day of the storm. Storm on the ocean, beats against the wall. The wall breaks in the opening scene of the movie. And there are cows swimming and people standing on top of their rooftops screaming. And my dad jumps in front of the screen and he's like, "Dorothy, turn it off. Oh my gosh." And do you know what? At 5 years old, I am convinced we are going to die. My dad is taking us to the land underwater. I don't know why he would do that. Always watch the movie first. And just weeks later, we would get on a plane and we would fly to a place my parents had never seen. Now, what I learned recently is my father actually was offered a different job before the job at the American School of The Hague. And this means a lot right now. My father was offered a job at the American School of Tehran in Iran in 1976. And I'm going to assume most of you know a little bit about the history of Iran in the 70s. Do you know that school was actually connected to the embassy where people were taken as hostages? Do you know why we weren't there? Because my dad, when the superintendent offered him a job, he also said, "Do you have any questions for me?" My dad had one question. I want you to think about, why were Americans in Iran in the 70s? Oil. And what kind of Americans? From what part of the United States would Americans have been from? Texas. My Scandinavia, Minnesota dad knew he's got black kids. His one question for the superintendent was, because I have a little brother too, I have 2 black children. How do you think your community will receive them? This was not a question he was prepared for. And here was his response, as my father tells it. "I wouldn't have a problem, but I can't speak for my community." And my father said, "I could never work for you." And because of that, we did not go to Iran. And because of that, we did not end up part of the hostage situation there. Talk about courage. Like, my father is the epitome of courage. So we end up at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands, which is a school that serves the World Court, the United Nations World Court. It serves the embassy, it serves the State Department, serves NATO, all of the Americans that worked in NATO. It also serves any foreign ambassadors who wanted their children to get an American education, attended the American School of The Hague. So we had children from all over the world. I went from being a kid in an orphanage to a kid in a school that every single American president visited when they came to the UN, because it was a mile away from the World Court. Jimmy Carter walked the halls of my building. George Bush walked the halls. I hosted Barbara Bush my senior year of high school for a day. That's wild. I have pictures to prove it. I hosted her. I don't know how I got to do that, but I was 18 years old, and they needed a student to host her, and they said, Erin's been here since she was in kindergarten. We're just going to let her host Barbara Bush. Anywho, so what changed my life? What changed my life was as a 9-year-old kid in the 4th grade, my best friend was a little girl named Yael. Yael was the Israeli ambassador's daughter. Yael and I sat next to each other in class, and I loved Yael, and we had so much fun, and we lived about a mile from each other, so we would play together after school too. And one day, Yael came to school, and she put her head on the desk, and she cried all day long. She just cried all day long, and she would not talk to me. And I finally asked my teacher, Mrs. Parlier, "What is going on with Yael? I don't know what's happened." And she said, "Erin, her mother called this morning. A bomb went off in her village right outside of Tel Aviv, and they're not sure who's still alive, but her family lives there, her grandparents and aunties and uncles. And of course, back in 1980, there's no cell phones. So it could take weeks before you have news. And so here's this 9-year-old girl wondering if she's ever going to see her family again." And I said to my teacher, "How do I love my friend Yael? I don't know how to love her. I don't know how to be a good friend." And my teacher said, "Go to the library and get every book that you can find about Israel." So I did. I went to the library and I asked the librarian, "Give me every book about Israel, every book by an Israeli author." And I took this box of books home and I read as many as I could that night. And when Yael came back to school the next day, something in me said, learn her language, learn her language. I already spoke English and Dutch. I knew the power of language already as a 9-year-old kid. And I said, "Yael, would you teach me to speak Hebrew?" And she said, "Oh, tomorrow I'll bring my kids' books." And there was this light in her eyes. There's somebody who cares about me. And every day at lunch, she would teach me Hebrew. Well, in December of that year, my parents dragged me to a PTA meeting. How many of you have participated in PTA for your children? Okay, yeah. I got dragged there because my parents are both teachers. So they were teachers and parents, so I got dragged to PTA. And I was not happy. And at the time, here I am, this 9-year-old kid, and I loved to look smart, and I was reading the Tolkien books. So I had a big, fat Tolkien book, and I was going to just sit in the back and be smart and read. And I'm sitting in the back of the library, and in walks Yael's father, the ambassador for Israel, in a black suit. And he looks very important. And behind him are 9 or 10 other men in suits. And they all sit at the table in the middle of the library, and they begin to introduce themselves. Yael's father, Israeli embassy, Japanese ambassador, Brazilian ambassador, Lebanese ambassador, Palestinian ambassador. I am not reading my Tolkien books anymore. I am paying attention. Do you know why they're having this meeting? Because the Palestinian ambassador's son was in the 2nd grade, 2 doors down from the Israeli ambassador's daughter. And they were having a meeting with these teachers to help them think about, how do we teach children whose families and countries are at war? And I am now listening with every fiber of my being, this 9-year-old girl, realizing, wait, we've got Israel and Palestine. By the end of the meeting, here's the conclusion I've come to. If these dads could talk about education, how come they can't talk about peace? I'm 9, and I have this revelation. And I decide the next day, I'm going to learn to speak Arabic too. I have a friend in my class from Lebanon. She'll teach me to speak Arabic. And so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I learn to speak Hebrew. Tuesday, Thursday, I'm learning to speak Arabic. I'm 9 years old. I was a weird little kid. I have remained weird the rest of my life, but I am learning to speak other languages. In March of 1981, our principal gets a phone call from the embassy for the country of Egypt. You may remember this guy, Anwar Sadat. So Egypt is in the middle of their civil war, and Anwar Sadat's wife, Mrs. Sadat, has a dream one night. If we could just get small children to think about peace early when they're in elementary school, could we end war? She has this idea. She has a friend named John Denver. She figures he'll come sing, and then she'll tell her story, and then they'll get every kid in the room to sign a peace commitment. And what better school to try this out than the United Nations school? And so her people call my principal and ask if he will host the president's wife for Egypt. Of course you say yes. You don't say no to the president's wife of Egypt and John Denver. So in March, we get a visit from John Denver and Mrs. Sadat. And I want you to imagine what Mrs. Sadat looked like. She's from Egypt. She looked like me. It was the first black woman I had ever seen in my life. And I have pictures. Do you know, she and I were the same size when I was a 9-year-old. Yeah, so I looked her in the eyes. But I want you to imagine me for the first time seeing someone who looked like me talk about peace. I was in awe of I want to be her. And when she was done, she went to the 4th grade teacher and asked, who are the 3 children most likely to change the world? John and I want to have lunch with them. And guess who got chosen to have lunch with the president's wife? And we sat at a little table at our school cafeteria, and I had John Denver on one side of me and Mrs. Sadat on the other. I totally did not appreciate having sung with John Denver until many years later. I didn't appreciate that as a 9-year-old. I do now. But we got to sit with the president's wife and John Denver. And her very first question of these 3 9-year-old kids was not, what's your favorite color or your hobby? Her very first question was, how are you going to change the world? And I raised my hand and I said, I know. I'm learning to speak Arabic and Hebrew, and someday I'm going to broker peace between Israel and Palestine. And she did not laugh at me. She pointed at me that day and she said, Erin, you are a world changer. I want you to imagine having a president's wife say your name and say, you are a world changer. And I ran back to my 4th grade teacher. I said, Mrs. Parley, I'm a world changer. What do I need to do now? And Mrs. Parlier, who was the most amazing teacher, she died of cancer about 12 years ago. She reaches into her desk drawer and she pulls out this big 50-page packet of fractions. Now, what I know now as a teacher is that's what she had in her desk. And she was quick thinking. And she thought, what can I give Erin to get her to work? It was not the magic change the world packet. It just was a packet she knew she had in her desk drawer. And she gave it to me and she said, do this. And I went home that night and I did all 50 pages. And I got back the next day and I said, Mrs. Parlier, what now? And she looks through the packet and she said, Erin, did you do? I said, I followed directions. Okay. You said, change the world, do a packet. I did a packet. Do you know, I would do 1,000 pages of math between March and June of my 4th grade year. And here's the lessons I learned. I learned 2 really big lessons from Mrs. Parlier. She was a smart lady. I learned, number 1, that greatness is not about where you're born. It's not about who you're born to. It's not even what your natural talents are. It's what are you willing to do with the talents you have. Whether you have just a little or a lot, it's what are you willing to do with the talents you have? And then the second thing that she taught me is be willing to work hard. Greatness requires doing what other people don't want to do. And here I was, this 9-year-old kid doing 50 pages of math every night for homework. Not even homework, because it wasn't like she was grading it. She was collecting the packets. But you know, I translated that to everything I did after that. And I would go on to be the first girl to play boys varsity soccer. I was the first middle schooler to play in the high school band. I was the first freshman in high school to make 3 varsity teams. I was not taking chances. I was going to be the best that I could be. And I knew because I went to the United Nations School. Do you know all the lawyers for the World Court have gone to Harvard or Yale or Stanford? So that's what I knew. I knew if I'm going to change the world, that's where I have to go. And when I was a senior in high school, I applied early admission to Princeton. I was scared of Harvard. That scared me. Princeton was, okay, we'll try Princeton. And in March of 1989, they announced over the loudspeaker, Erin has been accepted at Princeton. And my whole school erupts because both my parents teach there and they're so proud of me and so excited. And I get home that night. My dad is sitting at the kitchen table and I can tell he's been crying, and my dad is not a crier. What do you think Princeton assumed about me? White and rich. White and rich. Because the American School of the Hague cost $30,000 a year. I went for free. Princeton never looked at my financial aid papers to see that I was a teacher's kid. They looked at the name of my high school, and they made assumptions. And I got a $1,000 scholarship. Understand, I graduated with a 3.99 GPA. I spoke 4 languages fluently. I played 3 varsity sports. I was captain and MVP of all 3 for 2 years in a row. I played 2 instruments in the band. Like, you could not have done more things. And I remember that night at 18 years old, my dad with tears in his eyes saying, honey, you're going to have to send the letter back that you're saying no. Now, today we would just call the admissions office and say, did you see our financial aid paperwork? But you could only call if you worked for the embassy. There were no ways to call America at that time if you weren't a State Department person. And so my dad had to tell me that night, you're not going to Princeton. Here's a truth that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. There are going to be times, kind of like running for OSPI, where you do all the right stuff and it still doesn't work. And you better have a dream that's big enough that keeps you going, even when it doesn't work the way you wanted it to. I cried for about 24 hours. I cried. I was really upset. And then I got a letter from another college, the sister college to Princeton. So, fun fact, all of the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, Stanford, were all for only men until the late 1800s. So all of them have partner schools that are sister colleges. The sister college to Princeton sent me a letter, and they said, we'd like to pay for or waive 80% of your tuition. And mom and dad were like, guess where you're going to college, honey? Now, here's what I tell parents all the time now. I don't care how much a college gives you. Do not say yes if you have not visited. Guess what we had not done? Because it cost money to fly back to America. We didn't have money. And how many of you have seen a college brochure? They're pretty, right? They show you all the pretty bits. And it looks like a really beautiful place. And at the time, my favorite TV show, this means something really different today than it did to me then, but The Cosby Show was my favorite show. Of course, Bill Cosby's a hot mess, but at the time, we did not know. And he was from Philadelphia, where the college was. And so I thought, Bill Cosby's from Philadelphia, and a guy named Will Smith was just becoming famous, and he was from Philadelphia. And so this has got to be an amazing place. And understand, my parents made sure that I had read Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes. My mother's favorite human was Angela Davis. I've actually gotten to meet her now, but my parents made sure that I understood the history of Black people in America. So I did know the history. But I thought we've passed the civil rights movement. So Bill Cosby's from Philly. It's the city of brotherly love. It's got to be a fabulous place. And I come to America a week early to play soccer. And I get on a plane by myself and land in Philadelphia airport, get a taxi to head out to Bryn Mawr. And the very first sign in town says this: Bryn Mawr Golf Course, no coloreds or Jews allowed here. 1989. Oh, it gets worse. It gets worse. That sign did not come down until 2012. Oh, we're aware. We're watching. But I want you to imagine being a colored girl in a town that has a sign like that up. And I had a really quick decision to make. Do I tell my parents and go home the next day? Or do I say nothing? And I had worked my entire life to get to America. And so I said nothing to my parents. My mom didn't learn about that sign until about 15 years ago when they retired back here to the United States. And my mom heard me give a keynote at a middle school. And she's sitting right in the front row, and she begins to cry. And I realize I forgot to tell my mom that part of the story. But I will tell you, that sign was my college experience. My second week on campus, a woman walked up to me and she looked at me in the face. And without any hate that I could see, she said, you know you're only here because we have to have 10 of you here. And I said, 10 of who? There's not 9 other Erins here. Who are you talking about? And she said, there's this thing called affirmative action. And we have to have 10 Black girls here to get money from the government. And that's why you're here. And she turned around and walked away. And do you know what that did to me? For the first time in my life, I thought maybe I didn't earn my spot. I didn't even understand what it meant to be Black. But now I'm here because I'm Black. Did I not earn my spot? Y'all, I'm 54 now. I know I earned my spot, okay? But imagine being an 18-year-old kid. I suddenly began to doubt myself. And a little piece of me died that day. And then 2 weeks later, I was called the N-word with the hard R for the very first time in my life. I had read it in books because I'd read books. We read, oh my gosh, Mark Twain books. Huckleberry Finn, yeah, that's in that book a lot. So I'd read it. There's nothing like hearing it, though. And I remember I'm walking to the store one day. It's October of 1989. I just want to get a toothbrush, and I'm walking to the store, and I get to the light, and these 2 young men drive by in a Jeep with the top down, and they scream at me, N-word, get out of our neighborhood. We don't want any of y'all here. And they drive by, and I feel like someone has just punched me in the stomach. I've never heard the word towards me before. And I'm frozen, and I have nothing to say, and I do not go to the store. I turn around and run back to campus. And at the time, to call Europe, you actually had to call an operator, and the operator had to call Europe. I woke my parents up in the middle of the night. And my dad was the one who answered the phone. And I said, Dad, this is what just happened. And he said, N-word means dumb black people, and you're not a dumb black person, Erin, so just let it go. And he hung up the phone. I can't tell you the number of times my father has now apologized. But he was not prepared to answer that question. He'd never heard me called that either. And I remember feeling like not only had I been abandoned by my college, I'd been abandoned by my parents. They didn't know how to support me. And it was such a painful season. And then basketball started. And understand, Bryn Mawr is a small college. They are not used to having basketball stars. I was a star. I played every minute of every game my freshman year. I averaged 25 points a game. Took our team to the first winning season. We won every single game that year for the first time in the history of the college. I held records, actually, until just 10 years ago. I held records for over 20 years. I probably could have played at a big college, but we didn't know about that. I knew academics. I knew I could get a scholarship with academics. I didn't know about sports stuff, but basketball saved me, and I had a team. I had these women that were on my team, and I belonged to something. And do you know, when the last game was over in March, not one person checked on me from my team. Spring break came and everyone left. And not one person asked, do you need somewhere to go? And I was left, one of two women on campus. And I remember the first Friday in April, thinking to myself, maybe if I just wasn't here, nobody would miss me. And I remember I wasn't really a person of faith exactly at that point, but I remember asking God, would you just let me not wake up tomorrow? I think it'd be easier for everyone. And the next morning comes, Saturday morning, and the sun is out, and it's shining through my window right on my face, and I'm mad at God. Like, I asked for one thing, and now I feel like I need to get out of here. And I put my shorts and t-shirt on, and I just started running. I didn't even know where I was going, and I was running and running and running. And I ended up in this tiny little neighborhood, and everybody was black. Everybody. Tiny little houses. And right in the middle of this neighborhood was this beautiful outdoor basketball court. And a very tall man, about 6'8", 6'9", sees me, and he says, oh, you are a basketball player. We need one more. Get out here. And I could tell you did not say no to him. I could tell you did not say no to this man. So I said, okay. And I would play, and he could dunk from a standing position. This man was an amazing basketball player. And we played for 3-4 hours, and then he took his sons home. And I remember turning to these 3 high school boys, black boys, and I said to them, who was that Jay guy we just played with? And they said, Dr. J. Yes, yes. Yes. And I said, Doctor who? And they said, Julius Irving. I said, who's that? And they said, where are you from that you don't know Julius Irving? I said, I'm from the Netherlands. And they said, what's that? Not even where's that? What's that? And I said, it's a country in Europe, okay? And they said, where's Europe? And I said, where do you go to school that you don't know where Europe is? And they said, we stopped going to school a long time ago. And I said, wait, I thought in America you had to go to school by law until you were 18. And they said, no one has ever come looking for us. And I knew in that moment on the side of that basketball court how I wanted to change the world. And I ran with tears in my eyes all the way back to campus, and I called the operator and made them call my parents again and woke them up again in the middle of the night. And I said, thank you, Mom and Dad, for loving me well. Thank you for teaching me well. Thank you for giving me great teachers around me my whole life. I know how I want to change the world, and I'm not coming home. I want to teach kids who look like me. Every kid deserves to have a teacher who lives like you lived me. I'm not coming back. And my mom and I cried on the phone, and I never went back. And I have been working with kids in schools since 1991, really. So this is almost 35 years of working with kids in schools from North Philadelphia. We had 1,000 kids in our school. 800 of them had no running water or electricity. How do you learn when you have no food at home and you have no water at home? So part of the reason I ran for state superintendent is I realized at 19, 20, 21 that what happens in our schools is impacted by so much more than what happens in our schools. And so although I have been teaching, I've also been thinking about systems. How many of you have heard of Pete Buttigieg? Anybody heard of Pete Buttigieg? I was his 8th grade PE teacher in South Bend, Indiana. Uh-huh. My husband did his graduate work at Notre Dame, and I was seen at a basketball game playing basketball with some athletic directors. I was the only female, and one of them heard my story and said, "We've got a sub job at this school. Would you come and teach here for the rest of the year?" And part of the sub job was boys athletics, and Pete was in my PE class. He was just little Pete. Like Yeah. So I taught there, and then my husband and I tried to buy a home when we had our second kid. And the real estate agent, what did she assume about me over the phone? That I was white. And when my very large black husband and I showed up, my husband played Division I football. So he is 6'2 and a half, 350 pounds. He's not a small human. I am the smallest one in our house. So we don't make them small. But when we showed up to this home right outside of South Bend, Indiana, the real estate agent said, "Wait, are you Erin?" I said, "Yes." She took a step back and she said, "We don't sell to your kind." This is 1995, y'all, 1995. And I said, "So," and she said, "You will not find a real estate agent who will sell to your kind here." And I turned to my husband and said, "Where in America could we raise our children where our family and my parents could live on the same block if we wanted to?" And he said, "Tacoma, Washington." And we would come to Tacoma exactly 29 years ago. And I'll end with this last story about basketball. We moved here to Tacoma when our boys were both really little. And one day there was a knock on the door, and it was my sister-in-law. She was a Hilltop Crip, one of the largest black gangs in our state, and she was not making good choices. And she had her 2-year-old daughter in her arms. Her 2-year-old and my 1-year-old were born the same day. So he was 1, she was 2, my other son is 3 at the time. And she said, "I am not making good choices. I need to go into rehab. Can you keep her for a summer?" And she would never come back. And at the end of the summer, I played in men's basketball leagues, and my boys knew I played until I delivered both of them the day before I delivered. I played up until the day before I delivered. There are basketball players and there are ballers, yo. I played basketball till the day before I delivered, and then I started playing again when they were 3 weeks old. Like, basketball is really important to me, and I was getting ready to play in this men's basketball league, and my boys knew how to do basketball. She did not. In fact, her mother used to lock her in the house and go get high. And I remember that first game when I got subbed in, she thought I was leaving her. And she ran out onto the court. And I said, "You have to just sit." And she just started sobbing. And I knew that day I needed to take a break from basketball. I needed to just focus on her. And so I decided I'm going to take a year off of basketball. So I take a year off of basketball. In January, I get a phone call. Mind you, I have not played basketball for a long time. "Erin Jones, this is the Seattle Storm." "Excuse me? Why?" "Well, we got your name off a list. We're doing an open tryout." It was the second year in the league. "We're doing an open tryout. We'd like to invite you to try out." Now, what I should have said is, I am 28, I have 3 little kids, and I have not touched a basketball since last year. That's not what came out of my mouth. I said, "When are tryouts and where?" And she told me, and I hung up the phone, and then I said, "Oh my gosh, what did I just get into?" 24 hours later, my husband's mom called me. She said, "Erin, I had the weirdest dream last night. I know you're a stay-at-home mom right now, but I had a dream that I'm supposed to come live with you." Yo, I would get a tryout for the Seattle Storm on a Friday, exactly 2 weeks ago, 27 years ago. Yes. And then the Portland Fire on a Saturday. So don't do that, by the way. Don't do Friday, Saturday. So I tried out for the Seattle Storm on a Friday, drove down to Portland, and then tried out for the Portland Fire. At lunch on Saturday, I was ready to die. There were places in my body that I did not know had muscles that I hurt. And I just wanted to quit. And I'm laid out on the court at lunch. And then something in my head said, Erin, how many women get this opportunity? You can do anything for 3 more hours. Just push it out to the very end. And I pushed it out to the very end. And I'm literally laid out on the Portland Trailblazers training camp court, laid out at the end of the day. They blew the last buzzer and I'm laid out. And suddenly there's a camera over my face and a voice. Erin Jones, yes. This is NBA Live. Why? You were the oldest woman with the most children to try out for the WNBA this year. And they did an interview with me on my back. They never aired it, but on my back, I did an interview with NBA Live. But when we were done with the interview, there was a tiny woman waiting for me. And she said, Erin, you wouldn't know me, but I played on the very first women's Olympic team for the United States, and I've been watching you all day. So, oh, I'm sorry. This is not a good day. She said, did you try out yesterday too? I said, yes. Can you tell? She said, yeah. You looked a little tired, but I also watched you think about quitting at lunch. And I watched you push it out to the end of the day. And even more importantly, you spent the whole afternoon trying to make your sisters look good. You set screens and you played great defense. You're a leader and I can tell. She said, I'm taking a group of American women to play against the Mexican Olympic team next summer. Would you be our player captain? Sometimes you lose and it opens doors. I got to play on my 30th birthday. On my 30th birthday, exactly 25 years ago in a month, I got to play against the Mexican Olympic team. Do you know the girl I had to guard was 6'7"? She was their star. And she was 20. And I remember she walked out on the court and I turned to my coach and said, I got to guard her. And she said, Erin, you got this. And I remember thinking in my head, I am not letting her make me look stupid. I'm not gonna let it happen. I held her to 4 points and I had 12. And I could have quit then. I would go on to play that summer in Mexico. We had an amazing time. And when I came back to the US, my cousin on my dad's side called me and he said, I'm coaching a camp in Minnesota. Would you come and talk to the girls? They need to hear your story. Now, what I knew about my cousin on my dad's side is that he lived in the same small town as my mom's mom. Remember I told you I may come back to that? And I said, I will only come to Minnesota if you arrange for me to meet my grandma. He said, are you sure? I know her. I said, I'm positive. I want to meet her. And so I fly out to Minnesota. I coach camp, and he drops me off at her retirement community just like this. And my grandfather had already passed away, so she was by herself. And I go up to her apartment, and she's standing outside, and she is 4'11". So I just want you to imagine there's me and there's her. And she has a shoebox in her hands, and you can tell she's been crying all day. She brings me into her home. How do you start a conversation with someone when you know there's all this stuff? And she sits me down on the couch and she puts the shoebox between us. And I look in the shoebox. Do you know my mother had been sending her my school pictures every year? Every certificate, every newspaper clipping was in that box. And here's what my 86-year-old grandma said that day. She said, Erin, do you know you were the favorite grandchild? We just didn't know how to tell you because you're a, and she used the N-word with the hard R. And sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Grandma, you can't use that word. But here's what I knew in that moment. You can't say that word and mean it in a hateful way and also say you're the favorite. And I realized that moment, my grandma had been supremely ignorant. And I said, Grandma, you can't use that word. Well, what word do I use for you? I said, how about Erin? Let's start there. And she began to cry, and she said, can you ever forgive us? Your grandfather went to his grave, and he never got to tell you how much he loved you. And I said, why do you think I came here? I came here hoping to forgive you. And I held all 4'11" of her in my belly button, and we cried. And I went home, and she died 3 months later. And I made a promise when she died, I will use the rest of my life to help people talk about hard things. Do you know why, my own personal opinion, why we suck at talking about race? Because your generation was told to not talk about race. You can't get good at a thing you don't talk about. And so I invite people into conversations. I invite them, not like this, but like this. We have got to learn how to talk to one another. And we have to be in relationship with one another. And so I have spent really the last 25 years since I went to that basketball deal in Mexico, talking with people about race and having conversations and sharing stories. I'm going to close by reading the last page of my book. I wrote this book in 2021. My mom's sister, I told you my mom's family was not so fabulous. The day after George Floyd was murdered, my mom's sister sent her a message. And it said, Black people just need to follow the law and they won't get killed by police. My aunt sent that to my mom. And my mom called me and she said, honey, I'm so angry. I don't even know what to say to my sister. And I said, you say nothing. Don't give your energy away to people who don't deserve it. Don't say anything. And I made a promise that day. I will write a book devoted to helping us heal. And here's how it ends. Stay grateful for every encounter. Stay curious about those around you. Stay learning. Don't be paralyzed by not having the exact right answer. Keep moving and speaking and disrupting and investing. Do you see me on the track? I'm running in front of you, behind you, alongside you, reminding you when your lungs burn to keep going, reminding you to keep your eyes on the prize. Run through the finish line, my friends. You've got this. We've got this. Thank you.
So the clock says it's 4 o'clock, but I don't think there's anything happening in the chapel right now that we can't, let go for a little while. Kristen, how's our time? Is it okay for us to take some time for questions? Okay. So, questions, comments? Owelda.
What was the little town you grew up in?
Stillwater, Minnesota. Stillwater, it's right on the border of Wisconsin.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have lived here going on 9 years now. I am the only Black person who lives here, the only one. And just yesterday, over dinner, I'm sitting with my German husband, can you believe that? And someone says, do you all live in the same house? Yes, and that happens, and she knows what I'm talking about. And I want to tell you, she's amazing, but there are thousands and thousands of amazing Black people in America. She's not unique. And no, she's not. No, I was gonna say, she's not unique because we are all unique. I have a daughter that you're going to meet. She's older than you because I'm 84, you know. I know, you're one of my children. And she is in Melbourne, Australia right now teaching Aborigines AI because she said that poor people, poor Blacks, poor people need to be brought up to speed so they can compete in the world. And I'm telling you, she's not unique. Neither am I. And do you know the first thing people say about me when they meet me? They don't just say, this is Owelda. They say, you know what? She's an opera singer. Or she's wearing this. I'm this object. I am not a person. And all of the experiences she has had, I have had. I mean, my first husband was at Mount Holyoke. And when we arrived, you know, we don't need to talk because we speak a very special language. And I'm saying to all of you, don't look at Black people and say, oh, but she's educated. That's what makes her wonderful. No, Some kid on the street who is popping corn and who looks like has a brain and is just as smart as anyone else. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing your story, because when we connect, when we know who people are, we see them very differently. I have wonderful friends here, but I'm not loved here by many people. There are people who would not eat with me. I'm saying that right now, and I'm not lying. But I don't care, because there are so many people here that I love and have a beautiful relationship with. So look at her and don't go, oh, she's amazing. And you know what I also want to say? That when we are so worried about what's happening in our world, if it is completely black outside, you light one match and it lights the whole area. She is one of those matches. Be thankful that she's here. And there are so many other black matches, I'm telling you. Thank you, Rita, for this, for bringing her here and for this. And honey, we gonna talk.
You know, I want to share a really practical story about being in the facility with my parents. Because I'm adopted, people see me and they assume I'm the caregiver. Always, always. So in the hospital, they assume I'm the caregiver. So what my dad has learned to do, and he still does this with Parkinson's, he doesn't remember many things, but he remembers this. If ever there's a new one anywhere, he will say, "This is my daughter, Erin. This is my daughter, Erin. This is my daughter, Erin." And he will repeat it until, because once we were in the hospital and they asked if I would change his diaper, I was like, oh no. That's my dad. I'm not looking at that down. No, I will leave the room right now. But he has learned now to speak up, because they do assume that we're meant to serve. And I can't tell you the number of times when I was the assistant state superintendent of schools, people thought I was the assistant to the state superintendent. No, I was like the vice president. Yeah, second in line. And we were at an event here in Seattle at a hotel. And this woman could not get her brain wrapped around that I was not his assistant. She asked me 5 times, what does he like to drink? What does he like to drink? I said, ask him. I am not his assistant. I'm the assistant. But what does he like? I don't know. I'm not his keeper. But she just could not even fathom me being in that position. Yeah. Holyoke. Oh my gosh. We played in a soccer tournament there every year. Oh, yes, we won. But it was not an easy place to be.
How do we handle the decision of the Supreme Court the other day?
You know, I think white people need to be speaking up, because I think what too many Americans don't realize is when you strip away rights from black folks, you're stripping away rights from everyone. And a true democracy cannot function if not every member of the democracy has a voice. And right now, what this will mean is it's not going to impact us in the North so much, but in the South, it absolutely will impact the South. And what that means then is you have whole hosts of people across the South that will no longer have a voice. And so it is so important that white people speak up, and especially white people with positions of authority. I don't think people realize how dangerous that decision was and how far it has set us back. And here's the other thing that I would say to all of you. It can be really overwhelming to watch the news right now, and to feel like there's so much that I don't have control over. Now, what is really funny in my case, my congressperson is Marilyn Strickland. Her husband was my first boss, so I have her on speed dial. And I can call her and say, Marilyn, I saw you today in Congress. Are you talking up about this thing? I happen to have, like, Adam Smith. I know Adam Smith personally, too, because I ran for office, and I know Adam really well. Most people don't have their Congress people on speed dial, and it can feel, like, really overwhelming. Here's what I want to encourage you. Do what you can right here. So you heard a black woman, tell her story. Make sure you're reaching out to her and saying hello in the hallway now that you know. are there other people, and I will say to you, the staff in places like this often look more like us too. So how are you treating them? Do you know their stories? Do you know their names? Get to know their stories and their names. So important. And I think we can invisibilize the people that serve us. And like you said, I believe there's treasure in every single human. And so I spent my whole teaching career in the poorest schools with the brownest children. And I have children now who are superintendents of school districts, and they came out of nothing because brilliance is everywhere. That's my job, is to see the brilliance in people, but you have CNAs here too, and other staff members here who are brilliant, and see them, get curious about their stories, and don't see them as people serving you. They're people first.
Yeah.
And they're walking through journeys, and many of them will have really fascinating stories. We can make change right where we are. So if you feel powerless to do the big stuff, do the little things, like right here. Think about, how could you possibly serve the children that are at the school right behind you? Right? There are little things, and when you do those little things and put your hand to something or read to a little kid, that is changing someone's world too. So I want to encourage you, don't get so overwhelmed by the big things that you can't change. Do the little things right here. There are so many children right now that don't have grandparents, who need someone to see them as beautiful. And I parked at the top of the hill and walked past during playground time. There are lots of children over there that need someone to believe in them, someone to see the beauty in them. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you from my heart. This was absolutely stunning. And your story, your life is so meaningful, and the way you express it means a great deal to us. And I know Awilda, when she first moved here, people thought she was a part of the staff. And they still do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't doubt that.
Your courage and your commitment to the education of children. You're running for superintendent of public instruction. You are absolutely an amazing model for all of us. And I thank you so much for being here. And I thank you, my dear, for ensuring that you're here.
Do you know what's really cool? I lost my election for state superintendent, but do you know, since I ran, we have more Black people in our legislature than any state west of the Mississippi. Any state west of the Mississippi. Sometimes it takes just opening the door, right? For people to say, oh my gosh. And do you know, I had the greatest gift about a month ago. Emerge is an organization that supports women who are running for office. And they asked me to come and speak every year. And so I went to speak. And they draw out of a hat who's going to introduce the speaker. And they drew this young woman out of the hat. They didn't realize she was my student 20 years ago. I have a student, a woman of color, running right now for her legislative district where I taught her, in the same neighborhood where I taught her. And they had no idea she was my student. And I had no idea she was in Emerge. I didn't know she was running. But what's cool is I had her as a sixth grader. I read her application for a scholarship and was able to be part of giving her a full scholarship to college, at the college where I got my teaching certificate. And then she got to watch me run for office. She said, Miss Jones, why am I running? Because you did. Because if you could do it, I can do it. And so she got to introduce me. And she said, I've got this formal introduction, but can I tell you about Mrs. Jones? And it was the most, I got to tell you the story because it's a really beautiful story. She said, Miss Jones, I don't know if you remember this, but I taught French immersion. So I taught every subject in French, which I also love to do as a Black woman. I speak 4 languages fluently. And sometimes I will just burst into Dutch or German just to mess with people, just to mess with them. But I taught French immersion, so I taught every subject in French. And I used to give my students fake money, euros. And they could use those if they turned in homework or showed up to class on time or helped someone. I would give them fake money. And they got to spend that every Friday at a little store that I created in my classroom. Well, she found someone else's fake money on the floor one day. And I saw her. I was across the classroom, but I saw her pick up someone else's money and put it into her pocket. And that night, in her desk, I put a little note and I said, I saw you take that money. And I know it's so tempting to take something that's not ours. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to give it back tomorrow. If you'll just put that money back in the other kid's desk, we'll never have a conversation about it again. And we didn't. She talked about this at the Emerge presentation. And she said, Miss Jones, you taught me about grace. We all make mistakes. And how you showed up to me in the middle of that mistake has formed how I treat my staff now. She's almost 40. She said it has informed how I treat my staff. When they make a mistake, my first reaction is not to get angry and yell or to shame them in front of people. It's to put a little note and to give them that chance to do the right thing. How cool is that? I did not remember that story at all, but she told it in front of all the Emerge women, and she is running for office.
Yes, yes. Anyone else? Okay. I need that exercise.
Well, at the risk of countering what Awilda said, I will say this is probably the most amazing talk I have ever heard. And I have heard a lot of talks. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. So here's the thing that I want to say about that. I think what Awilda is trying to say is there's Black excellence everywhere. Now, here's the difference between me and Black excellence everywhere. I get to practice telling my story everywhere. So I'm skilled at that, right? But what you may be missing is that there is Black excellence everywhere. There's brown excellence everywhere. There's lots of excellence everywhere, and we need to start looking with new eyes. But I have, people ask, how did you get good at telling your story? I taught sixth graders for 15 years. If you can't hold sixth graders' attention, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds, you're gonna die. So I am good at telling a story. But I appreciate that. This is my gift to the world. I know this is the gift I was given, to tell stories. And I hope that in the telling of my stories, I can bring people together. Can I close with a poem, another poem?
Definitely.
Okay. I read a poem just the other day. We had a Black youth mental health conference on Saturday, and I was asked to present a poem, and I said, I'm going to write an original poem. And it's called The Butterfly, and this is not just for Black people, it's for all of us. I believe it's the moment that we're in as a country right now. It's called Butterfly. We talk about the butterfly often, admire her wings, the color, the shimmer, the beauty. We talk about the perfection she displays, her physical symmetry, and apparently effortless flight, majestic. They told me someday I too will fly. I too will be the perfect blend of beauty and aerodynamics. This is hard to imagine in my current state of dysfunction. They told me when my life was segmented, compartmentalized, plain, unable to get off the ground, the day would come that I would feel whole, beautiful. They said I would emerge from the cover of Cocoon magnificent. But my body is on fire, everything burning, dissolving. Someone forgot to mention that in order to become the butterfly, I must sit in the sledge of destruction, in a shroud of darkness, immobile, paralyzed. It is hard to remain hopeful about the possibility of future beauty and purpose while drowning in the reality of now. Be still, caterpillar. Someday soon, you will arise out of this current death spiral into life. Butterfly is coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. So, here we are. Bridges to heal us. And the us is capital U, capital S.
This is for you.
Oh, thank you.